So 1400, that means showtime. Right, welcome everybody to this afternoon session on the third day of the POLIS Conference. It's all about mobility hubs and nodes today. You've probably noticed over the last few years that the talk and the drive around mobility hubs has really exploded. In the last few years, lots of different definitions, lots of different services being offered at these mobility hubs, lots of different strategies. And we hope to dive deeply into that discussion today with 4 interesting presentations. There we go. We have got 4 presentations lined up for you for the next hour and a half, starting with Olga Anapryenka. I'm sorry, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Welcome, welcome. Lorenza dell'Erba from the city of Bologna in Italy. Lorenza, you want to give the crowd, the audience a wave? Nice to see you. And then we've got our third speaker, Rebecca Karbaumer. Oh, that's me. I will also be chairing today's session from the city of Bremen. And Bram Seeuws from Autodale.net, based in Ghent, in Belgium. Welcome. But before we go to the speakers, we see the obligatory housekeeping. If you're not familiar with the sessions yet, at the moment, you obviously have the opportunity to chat and ask questions during the entire session this afternoon. You can do that in the, obviously the chat function, but make sure to go to the session section of the chat. You can also have a look at who is joining us in this virtual room under the people, and then again, selecting sessions. You can hide the chat, obviously, when you, if you double click on the screen, you can make the presentation larger, the speaker. And then after the session, don't forget to visit the networking area. You also have the opportunity via this platform to connect with people individually and have individual calls, and also check out the exhibition area. And obviously, social media, hashtag POLIS20, spread the word about what you're hearing and seeing today. And before we go into the talks, I'm going to give you an opportunity to test that chat function and make sure that you are in the right session or segment of the chat function with a bit of trivia. I don't know, maybe many of you have been stuck in lockdown and are maybe finding creative ways for dealing with the corona blues and in lockdown, and one that I'm certainly enjoying very much is obviously the online pub quizzes. So let's go and explore some trivia for today. The question is, what historic events occurred on December 2nd? Is it A, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of France in Paris? And by the way, you can enter your answers in the chat for the session. Just type a letter. What do you think it is? Was it Benazir Bhutto was sworn in as Prime Minister of Pakistan, became the first woman to head the government in the Islam-dominated state? Did Isaac Asimov publish his I, Robot collection of sci-fi short stories? Was it Stephen Hawking, who claimed that artificial intelligence could be a threat to mankind and spell the end of the human race on December 2nd? Or did Ringo Starr have his tonsils removed? So enter the answers into the chat. You're comfortable. And our speakers, feel free to chime in. What do you think it was?
E, I think. And well, I think probably maybe all of them.
Bram, Lorenza, your guess?
I'm not sure, but maybe I'm right with Alan. All of them.
And Bram?
Well, difficult one, but I also go for all of them.
That is correct. In this case, there are no wrong answers. Well done, everybody, and thanks for playing along with this maybe slightly silly exercise. But segueing into what we are talking about today, and perhaps the list of historical events next year, we can add to that list. The POLIS Conference Hubs and Nodes session changed the way cities think about mobility hubs. That happened in 2020. So now let us dive into our first speaker. And Olga, I will ask you to share your screen.
Sure.
So Olga, you work for Steer, which is a consultancy based in the UK, and you manage a number of projects around new and innovative technologies, around intelligent infrastructure, new and integrated operational platforms, mobility as a service, and mobility hubs.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. That's correct. So I'm a senior consultant and a new mobility team at Steer, and we definitely work across key 3 areas, which is shared mobility, electrification, and emergent services such as mobility hubs and mobility as a service. I'm pleased to see everyone today, and I'd like to talk about the project we developed for Sestron, which is, sorry, I'm just trying to move my slides.
I'll leave the stage to you and come back afterwards for questions. Yeah, looking forward to your take on mobility hubs.
Thank you. 1 second. Sorry, I think I'm just having a slide. Oh, here we go. So yes, today I'll be talking about the project we developed for Sestron, which is the South East of Scotland Transport Partnership. And it's a regional transport partnership of 8 local authorities in Scotland. And also Sestron is part of the Share North project, which is the Interreg North Sea region project, in a European project which includes activities for developing, implementing, promoting mobility hubs, and assessing car sharing, bike sharing, ride sharing, and other forms of shared mobility in urban and rural areas. I think the core purpose of our study was to demonstrate the role and the scope of mobility hubs within the specific regional context of the Sestron, and to devise a framework for their implementation, and also identify potential locations for introducing mobility hubs in the region. I think I should highlight that it was very based on the Sestron region, and work we've done was linked to the objectives of the region. And one of the key tasks was to develop the definition and objectives of the mobility hubs, which are an evolving concept, with some of them first developed by the city of Bremen in Germany and later expanded to cities and regions in Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And I think existing definitions of mobility hubs follow common themes and concepts, recognizing the mobility hub as a link between sustainable and shared transport modes, supplemented by additional facilities and features which benefit and attract the user. You can see the definition which we developed for the Sestron region, and it reads as defines mobility hub as a recognizable and easily accessible place which integrates different transport modes and supplements them with enhanced facilities, services, and information aimed at encouraging more sustainable travel, creating sense of place, and improving journeys and travel choices. I think one of the key questions when we developed the definition was, well, why do we call a place a mobility hub, and why isn't it just transport interchange? And to answer this question, we developed a set of the criteria and characteristics which a hub should have in order to be called a hub. And I think I need to again say this was developed specifically for the region, so it meets the objectives of the region. And basically, we say that the hub should have collocation of public transport and shared transport, so at least one or more public transport modes and shared transport modes. It should have safe and secure bicycle storage, and also provide good lighting, visibility, accessibility, and safety for the users. It also should improve the surrounding public realm through the design of the hub, like introducing public art and parklets and planting. And it also should serve local needs. So you need to think about people who are going to use the hub. And I think the last part was that each hub should have a pillar or a board which is branded and provides them information which is clear and visible. So I think that the pillar should be like a beacon of the hub, which helps the user to see where the hub is located, and also provides information what services the user can find there and how to use them. And we also looked at developing the typology, because it was a study for the whole region, and the whole region is quite diverse. So this typology considers types of mobility hubs in range of contexts, from city center to rural areas, and it overlays the type of place with local geographical factors and trip generators. So one of them is large interchanges and city hubs. So those hubs and areas would be characterized by high demand for transport, high passenger numbers for starting and ending the journeys, for transferring between the modes. And it should be noted that the space may be limited in these hubs, meaning that there may be a need to focus and prioritize sustainable, efficient modes and links to the first and last mile modes. Next category was transport corridor and linking hubs. So basically the focus on services which link residents in surrounding areas to core transport network, and providing an opportunity to offer greater choice to people for first, last mile trips. The third category was key destinations. So basically business parks, hospitals, shopping center, key tourist attractors. And those areas would be characterized by high density of users and a need to offer commuting links and back-to-base solution. Basically people traveling to the key destination and they're traveling back. And they would normally located in areas which attract regular, sustained visitor numbers. Mini hubs or network of mini hubs, I think they would be placed mainly in the areas where the transport offer is limited and demand is lower. And potential locations for mini hubs can include like suburban settings and new housing developments. And the last category was market towns and village hubs. So those are typically smaller hubs, which potentially can offer a wider range of additional services and can be focused on services such as also cafes or co-working spaces, which is more applicable to the rural setting and adding more than just mobility to the needs of rural community. And we also developed the Mobility Hubs kind of implementation framework, which is divided into 3 key phases: pre-planning, planning, and implementation phase. And we start the first pre-planning phase basically was what our report was about, is developing the vision and framework for the development of the hubs in the region, which also identifies the locations of the hubs and also prioritize those hubs which can be selected for planning phase. In planning phase, you would develop the implementation plans for each selected location, and you would also have the feasibility study and identify the partners and services you would like to engage with. Then you would go to go, no-go decision, and if it's successful and the funding is secured, you'll go to the procurement, development of the marketing and branding, then construction, operations, and monitoring and evaluation. I think I'd like to say that there isn't a perfect solution for mobility hubs, and the approach to planning and implementation of each hub will need to be tailored. And I think one of the areas I'd like to highlight is that the implementation plan should take into account future operations and maintenance and ensure there is a budget and a partner responsible for these activities. So one thing is to construct a hub, but you do need to think about how it's going to be operated and who is going to be paying for it. And in terms of the data analysis, so basically we looked at it from 2 different angles. So one of them was understanding the need for mobility hubs, and then understanding the demand for mobility hubs. So to understand the need for mobility hubs, we looked at the areas which are most deprived in Scotland, and we used the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation for it, and which kind of measures different data sets across the 7 domains, which is like income, employment, health, education, skills, and training. And for understanding the demand for mobility hubs, we also done the tailor-made analysis of the data, looking at the potential demand for the hubs and kind of therefore linking it to the areas where potentially the operations can be commercially feasible. And you can see that the type of data we used for it. I think population, workplace population, basically high residential and workplace population increases the demand for a mobility hub. Then we used mosaic population and mosaic data. This data helps to identify areas where users are most likely to utilize a mobility hub, because the data can be linked to propensity of each group to use shared mobility services. We looked at geographic access to services. Basically, population of these areas which have a shorter drive time are more likely to switch to public transport and benefit from a mobility hub. and areas with pre-existing good transport links are suitable locations for mobility hubs. And of course, we looked at existing services such as car club locations and bike share docking locations, which if they're already there, why don't we use those? I think on the map now you can see an example of the demand map, not the need map. It's for City of Edinburgh. We created it for each local authority. Probably an interesting point, you can see that some of the locations can benefit both authorities if they're located at the border, because there are lots of people who live, for example, in Mid Lothian or West Lothian and travel to Edinburgh for work every day. And well, obviously, the darker areas show the higher potential of potential for mobility hubs in the area. And I think the last point I'd like to talk about is probably a couple of takeaways which we come up with. And the first of course, each mobility hub is unique, and the hubs may vary in size and components, and each hub should be tailored to the needs of the users in the area and also the objectives of the hub. There is a need for consistency and clear branding, and each hub should have coherent branding across the whole region, and a clear recognizable logo associated with hubs will increase visibility and users' awareness, leading to the higher take-up of the service. And it's especially important for the whole region and for the regional approach. Mobility hubs planning should include feedback from transport operators, both public and private, and other service providers, for example, such as electric vehicles infrastructure companies. And stakeholder engagement and communications plans should be developed and followed through the process of implementation of the hubs at different stages and also for different audiences. So it's not a secret that the hubs can cause tensions from local communities, as they can be perceived as taking away parking spaces for private cars. So it's important to increase awareness of the benefits and advantages of the hubs and engage with local communities throughout the implementation phases. It's more like also educating the users about what is it and how it can be used and how the user will benefit from it. And there's also the need for monitoring and evaluation. So basically the impact of mobility hubs on travel behavior, usage, and wider transport objectives such as carbon emissions and congestion should be monitored to build an evidence base for future expansion and continuation of the service. And well, at the same time, it's also important to establish a baseline and develop an understanding of existing travel behaviors prior to implementation of mobility hubs. So then we can actually compare. Also, there is probably a need to assess the impact of a mobility hub as a whole, rather than, because we have lots of data from different components of hubs, like shared cars or bike share. But I think no one, to my knowledge, has ever assessed the whole impact of a whole hub as a group of services. And in terms of mobility as a service, well, we see the hub as a physical representation of mobility as a service, and probably as a stepping stone towards mobility as a service in the region. And so we do believe that the new housing developments present a key opportunity to promote sustainable transport modes through implementation of mobility hubs. So we think that the housing developers can reduce private car parking provision and increase density of the estate through development of mobility hubs. Hence, we're kind of trying to encourage the developers in the region to work with local authorities and see whether the hub can be implemented. And I think the last probably point was about funding and business model. I think it's kind of a gray area at the moment. Lots of the hubs implemented are funded or subsidized by the government or local authorities. And there are a few examples when the private sector is leading implementation of the hubs. And I think the commercial feasibility of it yet to be defined. I think that's pretty much it, and thank you very much for listening to me. And this study can be found online if you just Google Sestron Mobility Hubs Strategic Study.
Thanks very much, Olga. We've got a few quick questions coming in already from the audience, but I'd like to take my moderator privilege and ask you one first. So you prepared the study for Sestran, which is the Southeast Scotland Transportation Network. It's also a project partner of the city of Bremen and Autodeon.net in the Share North project. And this is a feasibility study that you've carried out, basically, in which an action plan will be based on. Are there already concrete plans to implement mobility hubs in the region as a result?
Yeah, I would say it's not even feasibility. It's more like vision and framework, which the region should follow. And yes, I think they're currently working on the development of the hub in East Lothian and in Middlesbrough, and there are a few other locations which potentially will be taken forward in the future. And I think the idea is to test it into 3 key destinations, for example, and then see how it works, assess the impact, and roll out wider in the region.
And one of the items you mentioned in takeaways was the business model, and there are a few questions on that. A business model, I'm going to combine two questions from Silke Frank and Anton Haltenort about the business model. So do you have guidelines for business models based on your experience? Like, what would be the best business model, or who should operate mobility hubs?
Well, I think we touch on it at a very high level in the report. So you can see that kind of in terms of the operation and the ownerships, it can be local authority, it can be outsourced to the operator, or it can be a model when you work in the partnership. We didn't look into the actually defining business models, and I think it's a second step for the research. And I think also Comma UK is currently looking at developing understanding of potential business models for the hubs. And basically, as I said, it will depend on who owns the hub, whether it's private sector, public, or mix of both. And
you mentioned that you interviewed a lot of mainland European cities like Bergen, Bremen, some other cities to get input for your study, because there are quite a few cities, at least on the mainland, that already have mobility hubs. And there's one question about what your maybe perception or assumption is on why the UK is just now starting on such concepts.
Well, why is it starting so late?
Not my question.
Well, I think that it takes time for the hubs to be implemented, and also it takes time to secure the funding, and even kind of Sestran secured funding, but also was part of Interreg project, which actually the European examples encourage UK to follow. And I think at the moment in the UK, hubs are kind of hype word, and lots of local authorities are looking at implementing those in some form. Some of them developing like eHUBS, electric hubs. So basically providing electric vehicle infrastructure and then adding on additional services. Others look at it from future transport zones funding. So I think it may be, well, why it's coming late, I probably can't say, but it's coming now because there's funding available to develop it, and that's how it's linked. And also you can see that it was successful in Europe. And yeah, I need to say I interviewed Rebecca and Bram as part of my research. So thank you very much for your inputs.
You're welcome. But I think it's also part of just now a lot of just a few European projects. eHUBS and Share North have really created a lot of buzz around mobility hubs, and we've just been talking a lot about it, and really been able to inspire a lot of stakeholders in the UK. So maybe, Giles, that answers your question. But one last question. Oh, if you're interested in business models, Piero has posted something in the chat from the eHUBS project about business models. And Wasim, I think we will get to your question about the history of mobility hubs with some of the other presentations this afternoon. So Olga, thanks very much. At the end of the session, I'll ask you to come back for some final wrap-up questions to all the speakers. But we will now go to our next speaker in the lineup. Lorenza, I'd like to ask you to join the stage. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
And feel free to begin sharing your screen already.
Yes.
In the time Lorenza dell'Erba works for the Metropolitan City of Bologna and in Italy, and I've heard it's snowing where she is right now today.
Yes, it is.
Lorenza is an
Sorry.
architect with experience in the development of sustainable urban mobility plans and technical design and urban design and transport policy. And she started working for the City of Bologna in 2017 in the mobility planning office. And she will give us some insight on the local take on mobility hubs. So the screen is yours, Lorenza.
Okay, thank you very much. So I work for the Metropolitan City of Bologna, which is a local public authority with political and institutional competence in the whole metropolitan region of Bologna that includes 55 municipalities. I work in the mobility planning office, and in these last 3 years I was mainly engaged for the development and actuation of the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, which has been adopted last November. The first mobility plan in Italy dealing with a metropolitan region. So let's start with the situation we have to face from a planning point of view in our territory, where, as you can see, traffic congestion and urban sprawl, as you can see in the blue map, characterize the most great obstacles, I can say, for the development of sustainable mobility. You have to consider that in Italy, 2 people out of 3 drive cars every day, and the 16% of daily transfers are with private cars. So the process we are bringing on is a complete change of perspective from a car-oriented city through a sustainable mobility city to a people-oriented city. What it means? Where in a people-oriented city, public space is placed at the center of life and of the planning process, and it represents an integrated system of function and services for everybody, focused on also on sustainable mobility. The Metropolitan City of Bologna has implemented 2 main plans. I told you already about the SAMP, and the next very important plan is the Metropolitan Territorial Plan dealing with urban development. These both plans are integrated in a common vision of planning between sustainable mobility and sustainable development of the territory. The key concept is that the conurbation can grow and regenerate only together with the implementation of sustainable transport infrastructures. A perfect actualization of this approach, of this planning approach, we can find in the mobility hubs projects. So the SAMP identified them as the new gateway for the metropolitan region. So they are meant as strategic nodes of metropolitan public transport for intermodality, and also the urban multimodal hubs as the main support for cycle tourist network, and the strategic bike lanes plans, Bicipolitana. For the Metropolitan Territorial Plan, the mobility hubs are the new backbone of urban organization. So they are the key areas for priority of urban regeneration and public space qualification of metropolitan relevance. And so they are meant as urban polarities with multi-services for citizens, city users, and tourists, thanks to the realization of a mix of functions. You can see here all the strategies that are implemented for the metropolitan public transport in the SAMP. One of them is the creation of a network of 30 transport interchange hubs, our mobility hubs. As you can see in the map, the mobility hubs in our territory are dislocated along the corridors of our railway system. So they are they correspond in our railway stations. So we have
Lorenza, sorry, we seem to have a problem with your sound. You've gone on mute. And we're still unable to hear you.
Okay, now you can hear me?
Perfect, thanks.
Okay. From this slide, maybe I can restart from this slide. Okay, so as you can see in the map, mobility hubs are dislocated along the railway corridors of the Metropolitan rail system, mostly corresponding the stations. So 9 of them are in the capital city of Bologna, and many of them are crossed by very important lines of public transport, such as tramways and bus rapid transit lanes, and 15 mobility hubs are crossed by very important cycle routes. 5 of them are crossed by the Sun route, Eurovelo 7. As you can see here, the mobility hub with the Sun. So these are a brainstorming map about how we meant for what we want to develop in our 30 mobility hubs. So in the integration and intermodality for many kind of users, pedestrian, cyclists, private cars, and the sharing system. The most important keywords are the one you see in the right side: multimodality, intermodality, attractiveness, identity. All these contents are developed in our guidelines. In fact, the Metropolitan City of Bologna underlines a protocol of understanding with our national railway operator to elaborate the guidelines for the designing of mobility hubs. These are the main topics included in the document that is going to be approved. Goals and challenge, the main function for mobility hubs, the project principles, measure and action, project levels for every mobility component, the importance of public participation and the relationship with territory, with local community, economic sustainability, and last but not least, some example of best practice. As you can see, these are the main challenge. The first challenge is to design mobility hubs as a real attractive poles. And firstly, this is possible if the projects guarantee a very high level of accessibility for every category, starting from the people with disability. Then, of course, urban identity has to be improved to connect the local community. Also, sustainable intermodality, to elevate the railway station to the new role of interchange transport hubs. Last but not least, among the project challenge, there is the scalability of the measure and action. The aim is to find measure that can be scaled in every different context. The main function we set up in the guidelines are concerned with the whole area, dealing with the mobility hub. So we have to realize a unique project that concerns the railway station, tram and bus stop, the green spaces, the public space, the buildings around to be regenerated, and to find the service and the function that are necessary in that specific context. These are the very first studies for the preliminary project concerning the mobility hub of Medicina, which is a municipality located at the northeast of Bologna. The mobility hub is crossed, as you can see, by a very important regional cycle route and by the first Metrobus line, bus rapid transit, that we are developing, that we are designing. The hub will be the terminal of the new public transport service, as you can see here. And in these boxes below, these are the preliminary schemes to define function and placement for bus terminal, interchanging parking area, and pedestrian and bikers connections. And here in the next slide, with more details, you can find how the project is developing for the Metrobus terminal, and the designing for greening and public space regeneration. The next two projects are going on. We have at the half of November a public competition for these two mobility hub are Vergato. Vergato will be crossed by the Sun route, Rovello 7, and Castel San Pietro Terme, which is located in a rural context. So these are the projects we are going on, and next times we will see, I will show you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lorenza, for your presentation and some nice visualizations towards the end. Before I do questions from the audience, I have a quick question for you. Let's see, I mean, mobility hubs are essentially nothing new. If you look at regional railway connections and the services offered around railway stations. How does your mobility hub concept differ from the classic railway stations? Are there sort of basic standard components that you say that you've defined as essential at these mobility hubs that make them unique? And then the second question, who is your main target group or user group for these mobility hubs that you are tailoring to?
Yes, so the most important things in designing mobility hubs is to involve the local community and to map the real needs and function that the area of influence where the railway station is will deal with, is going to deal with. So we really believe that public participation and the developing of the project is a key passage for this project. So the target we are going to involve are stakeholders and citizens, but also tourists and city users.
Okay, and the definition for mobility hub, what makes it unique?
Unique, you want an adjective. What do you want?
How is it different from I'm playing devil's advocate a bit. How is it difficult from a standard railway station and services that you offer at regional connections?
The difference, I think, that we are not going to design only the railway station, but the whole context in which the railway station is in. So we are going to to specialize the project for every different mobility hub. Now we don't know exactly how, but we need the participation of the local community.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so to segue into that, there's a question from the audience of the projects that you've carried out already. How well received have they been by citizens and the local public? Have you received feedback already?
For the first project of Medicina, we have deal with only with public entity, with the municipality involved, because this mobility hub is strictly connected with the feasibility project of the Metrobus line. So we are at the preliminary phase, but we are going to propose the final project to citizens and the local communities that are crossed by the new Metrobus line. So we are going to do it.
Okay, and then one other question about the scope or the scale of it is a question from the audience. Whether the Bicipolitana
Yes.
also covers suburban areas of Bologna and its connection to the city. Does that include secured bicycle paths? And kind of linked to that question is also a question, how far do you go outside of the city in order to convince people to take the train rather than the car?
So, very good questions. The Bicipolitana is a network that involves all the metropolitan territory. So it has a regional scale, both for everyday mobility by bike, but also for cycle tourism. So we can, with the Bicipolitana, we can reach all the 55 municipalities of our territories. So the second question is, how can we convince people to use a train and instead of car?
Yeah, how far outside of the city do you go to engage people to travel by train?
So we have some strategies dedicated to our railway system, of our metropolitan railway system. In the SAMP, we have enforced this system with much more service in the rush hour. So you can go by train in rush hours and have a train also in every 5 or 10 minutes. So this is one of the strategies we are implementing, and the mobility hub will have a key role also for that, because you can have many possibility of interchange from bike to train, from bike to bus, and very important is also the possibility of take the bicycle on the trains, and our trains are designed for that. And this is a very important point to design with great attention in the mobility hubs.
Thanks very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions at this moment, but Lorenza, maybe you could take a look at what's coming in the chat and answer individually. There was another question, a general question about whether the presentations will be available from this session. Yes, POLIS members receive access to all the presentations. If you are not a member, feel free to contact any of the speakers individually in order to get presentation from them. So Lorenza, thank you. I'll ask you to join the stage again, the virtual stage, at the end of this session.
Thank you very much.
Now moving on to our next speaker, which just happens to be me, from the city of Bremen, located in northern Germany. And there was a question about the history of mobility hubs. And that's what I will be sharing a bit. I'll be taking you into the past and present of reclaiming street space and placemaking with mobility hubs in the city of Bremen and Bergen. It seems that Bremen was one of the first European cities to designate street space for the purpose of mobility hubs, and more specifically for car sharing. And we started this process in 2003 already. So we've got more than 17 years of experience with mobility hubs. And obviously that has had this happy effect of inspiring many cities and initiatives, as we already heard from Olga in the presentation. We'll hear from Bram. The city of Bremen is partner in the Share North project. It's an Interreg North Sea region project, and we talk a lot about mobility hubs and have created a lot of buzz, especially through the work of our Belgian partners, Autodeel.net and Taxi Stop. So if you see this image on the left, you will know this is created by the Share North partner and was inspired, among others, by the city of Bremen and Bergen in Norway. But let me take you to the city of Bremen. And we're located in northern Germany. If you've never been here, it's a beautiful UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Site, a compact, walkable, bikeable city where more than 60% of daily trips are done by car. Not by car, sorry, by sustainable transport modes. Only 36% are done by car. We have over 500,000 residents. So not too small, but it still has a village-like atmosphere sometimes. However, we face a lot of the same problems as many cities, and one of them is this issue of resource and space efficiency. These historic street structures, our streets are unfortunately not used for the original purpose, which was for people and for delivery, which are now filled with cars, and that not only is inconvenient and not only ugly, it's also a safety risk. So this is one of the main reasons why we invest and plan mobility hubs, and have for the last 17 years, is soft measures for reclaiming that public street space. Obviously, improving local air quality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a priority. Improving social inclusion and accessibility in the city for people of all ages and physical abilities is an important aspect of planning mobility hubs, and in general, increasing the quality of life in the city. And one of the ways we do that is that specifically in our mobility hubs, we focus a great deal on car sharing. We know that car sharing in connection with a good public transport network is an attractive alternative to private car ownership. And research that we had done a few years ago in Bremen showed that one car sharing vehicle in Bremen replaces 16 privately owned cars. That means the more than 19,000 users that we currently have gotten rid of more than 6,500 privately owned cars off the street. And the mobility hubs we have in Bremen are two varieties. We have Mobilpunkte. These are the large mobility hubs with 4 to 12 car sharing vehicles that link to public transport, cycling infrastructure, often taxi stands, or other neighborhood services like recycling facilities. We also use this very nice logo, the shared mobility logo. That is also and will be available for free use in the Noun project. We encourage you to use that as well. The other form of mobility hub are the Mobilpunktchen. These are the small neighborhood hubs with 2 to 3 shared cars, and also the standard signage and bicycle parking facilities. Important in all aspects is this visibility and easy accessibility of shared modes and the other services offered at the mobility hubs. And we just have a map of Bremen, the city center. We currently have 43 mobility hubs, Mobilpunkte and Mobilpünktchen, and they make up about a third of the car sharing stations in the city. Our goal is to expand the network by 8 to 10 new hubs each year, and to fill gaps in the network so that there is a maximum of 300 meters between each station in the city. But a mobility hub in Bremen is more than just car sharing, and it's more than a mobility station. We use it as a way to solve urban transport problems. Through simple design elements, we are able to use the mobility hubs to prevent illegal parking behavior simply through infrastructure designs. And we usually go out with neighborhood initiatives and local politicians to find out where such measures are necessary. We also work on improving the mobility of physically and visually impaired residents with mobility hubs by also, when we're redesigning infrastructure, also to consider their needs, also something simple as barrier-free intersections and tactile elements. Another placemaking aspect is bicycle parking. There is never enough bicycle parking in a city like Bremen, and if you want to encourage cycling, you've got to integrate places for people to safely park their bicycles. And not only the users of the mobility hub benefit from it, but the neighborhood as well. Another design element is using the implementation of a small mobility hub as an opportunity to deal with issues like maneuverability and accessibility of narrow neighborhood streets for emergency services vehicles. So we redesign spaces so that these types of vehicles can easily navigate through the narrow neighborhood streets. We also use a mobility hub implementation as an opportunity to make general infrastructure improvements, improve pedestrian crossings, so that the acceptance in the surrounding neighborhood is also higher. Obviously, when you go in to plan a mobility hub, you are taking away parking spaces, and that always leads to a surprisingly highly emotional reaction from the public. So by saying we are taking away parking spaces to install shared mobility services like car sharing, but we're still improving the quality of the infrastructure and providing improvements that the entire neighborhood can benefit from, regardless of whether or not they use those services, that really increases the acceptance of those measures. And then finally, rainwater infiltration. It seems trivial, but I am a strong proponent of interdisciplinary planning. So thinking beyond mobility, but also thinking about urban climate resilience. And it can be something as simple as reducing the amount of sealed surfaces by choosing a special pavement and hub design that allows for better rainwater infiltration during heavy rain events, for instance, which is what Bremen is faced with in light of climate change. So there's a lot of aspects that we consider. And one interesting sort of side effect is that mobility hubs can also contribute to gender mainstreaming your public realm. And the study I mentioned that we carried out a few years ago, we asked what was important for car sharing services citizens, and there were differences between how men and women responded to these survey questions. And obviously vehicle availability and 24/7 phone services, those are things that providers are more in control of, but we as a municipality planning mobility hubs can influence this. Short distances between stations and visible stations in the public realm, which are aspects that are particularly important to female users of car sharing services. So we contribute to creating a more socially inclusive and safe public space by designing mobility hubs nearby. And just now a quick excursion, last few slides, to Norway. I mentioned Bremen has been planning Mobilpunkte since 2003. And we're very happy to have inspired the city of Bergen and Norway to do the same. And they opened their first mobilpunkt, even with the same signage as Bremen, in May 2018, and are rapidly working on expanding their network. They've got 9 mobility hubs at the moment. And they have taken this issue of placemaking to heart as well. So here's a before picture of one of the largest mobilpunkte now in Bergen. And here's the after picture. So this hub features more than 12 electric car sharing parking bays. Car sharing with EVs works really well in the Norwegian market as well. But as part of redesigning the space, was not only providing spaces for shared cars, but also integrating the trash collection services in the city center, which the city of Bergen does through underground trash collection services, and also making that space more safe and more accessible, especially on those snowy, slippery winter days. There's another picture. So thanks very much for your attention. That's sort of a brief overview of how we approach not only mobility hub and car sharing services, but also how we try to generate an added value for the neighborhoods where we plan them. Thanks. And now, as moderator and presenter at the same time, I'll try to take a look at some questions and get those answered for you before we move on to our final speaker. So, Bram, you have a question about what other actions the city will take to reach more people and more target groups in the coming years, and how to bring the mobility hubs to the next level in the city of Bremen. Yeah, definitely. There are two aspects to that question. We have a political mandate, for one, to expand mobility hubs and the car sharing services specifically to neighborhoods outside of the city center. So the classic business case for these services is obviously in high density neighborhoods close to the city center. But that means that not every citizen has access to the mobility hubs and the shared mobility services. So we are actively working on expanding the network and coming up with creative ways to create new business cases. And one was something that Olga mentioned as well. It's the integration into new housing developments, which is obviously always a challenge to find the right stakeholders and get the timing just right. But settings like that also offer additional financing for mobility hubs and sort of a financial kickstart for neighborhoods that might otherwise be more financially risky. The special case in Bremen, we do not subsidize any of the mobility services, so they have to be able to stand on their own. So by setting up mechanisms in which housing developers can finance the shared mobility services at the beginning is really important. Obviously also reducing sort of general operating costs for the providers by requiring a lower parking fee rate for shared mobility providers outside of the city center is also an aspect. Taking it to the next level, you said, we are now working on expanding existing mobility hubs to include cargo bikes, as well as reserved parking spaces for shared e-scooters and shared bicycles, which are currently both free-floating services in the city of Bremen. We're already finding that the mobilpunkte have sort of this natural organizing effect that free-floating services like shared e-scooters sort of tend to gravitate there and are parked there by users without being told to do so. But we, like many other cities, are obviously dealing with these extra vehicles parked on pavements and being, a barrier and a risk for pedestrians. And in a pilot project coming up next year, there are 10 existing mobility hubs that I've identified where we will try out simple providing marking using the modified pictogram, what I showed, to organize park e-scooters and e-bikes, but also permanent locking possibilities for shared cargo bikes. I hope that answered your question. Another question was, we discuss adding further smaller hubs to the Bremen network with other car sharing options, example for micromobility only. If I understand the question correctly, is either I may already have answered it from Anton, that we will be adding reserved parking areas for micromobility at existing Mobilpunkte. But at the moment, we are not looking at creating hubs specifically for micromobility without car sharing. For us, this main focus, as I said, is providing alternatives to car ownership and reducing the parking pressure that we have in the city. And that main strategy is to do that through car sharing. So if we plan a mobility hub, it will always include car sharing. Like autodale.net, these are the basic components that we have that must include components from mobility hubs. I have another question. If part of the shared cars in Bremen are electric, and was it easy to attract EV providers from Mobilpunkte? Part of the car sharing fleet is electric in Bremen. We have three providers in Bremen. The largest one has been around for more than 25 years. They currently have 9 electric vehicles in their fleet and 10 hybrid. The rest of the over 400 vehicles are conventionally fueled. The reason for that is that in Germany, the purchase of electric vehicles is still quite high. So it means a high upfront investment for the provider, also investment in infrastructure and additional skills in their fleet management. And some other challenges that include that their users, there's not a significant demand for electric vehicles. So this large provider is slowly starting to add more electric vehicles to their fleet, but since it has to be an economically sound decision for them, it's something they're progressing in carefully. There was one exclusive EV car sharing provider in Bremen that was not successful with their business model, but I think that had less to do with that they only offered electric vehicles, but more to do with their communication strategy. And now we have a new car sharing provider with only EVs that is just making a start here, and we'll be following their progress. But it is definitely a challenge. And I would say not necessarily required to have an entirely electric fleet. It's one of the things that makes car sharing most attractive and as a viable alternative to car ownership is the variety of vehicles with which users can meet their broad range of mobility needs. And that variety is based on vehicle size as well as propulsion rate. And now with a look at the time, I see there are quite a few more questions. I will try to get to them later in the chat or email you my presentation for those of you who have shared your email address. Thanks very much. But without further ado now, I'd like to move on to our last speaker, Bram Seeuws, with whom I've been working together in the Share North project for a few years with great pleasure, and we've learned quite a lot from each other. Bram, while you're sharing your screen, I will introduce you. Again, Bram is a policy and project manager at autodale.net, which is a Belgian NGO focused on car share promotion. And Bram, you have a broad range of tasks at autodale.net, going all the way from helping governments implement car sharing schemes, sometimes with EVs, developing shared mobility action plans, and setting up e-mobility hubs, which is what you're going to talk about today.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Screen is yours.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I will talk about eHUBS and the eHUBS project and our work in Belgium and how we want to reach a regional physical and digital network. As Rebecca said, my name is Bram Seeuws. I work for Untitled.net, which is a Belgian NGO, and our main goal is to maximize the ecological, social, and economic benefits from shared mobility through innovation, communication, lobbying, and expertise. And we are also one of the 3 co-founders of the Flemish MobiHub Association, which was established in 2019. So what I will talk about today is a little bit of history about eHUBS and the project, also about the history in Flanders, in the northern part of Belgium. Then I will go to the digital side of the hubs, and last but not least, I will round up this presentation with what we think are 4 steps towards the physical implementation of eHUBS. First of all, what are eHUBS? eHUBS is a physical cluster of shared and electric mobility modes. And it's a project funded by Interreg Northwest Europe, and our main goal is to establish 92 eHUBs in 7 pilot cities, with in total 2,400 LEVs and 670 shared EVs. The consortium consists of 7 pilot cities with 2 e-mobility providers, so 1 cargo bike provider and 1 e-bike provider, shared e-bike provider. 3 universities and 4 network organizations. If you want to know more about the project, I would like to invite you to check the eHUBS website. It was already posted in the chat box, but you're always welcome to check out the project. So if we go to Belgium, to Flanders, we, Territorial.net, Taxistop and Infopunt Publieke Ruimte, launched the concept already 3 years ago in Flanders. And as you can see in the picture, we were very much inspired by the city of Bremen via the Share North project. In 2018, the first eHUB was established. And over the last 3 years, we have been busy with promoting it in Flanders and abroad. We wrote a memorandum where we want the government to reach 1,000 hubs by 2025. We collaborated in the establishment of a Flemish framework for mobility hubs in 2019, and we supported or are supporting more than 50 municipalities in setting up 1 or more eHUBs or MobiHubs. This summer, the Flemish government came up with a strategy and a funding program. So they will fund 1,000 hop-in points. Hop-in will be the name they use in Flanders for the eHUBs, and they have around 105 million euros available for that. So we are very happy that there's a lot of budgets, a lot of funding programs, and also that they agree with our ambition to reach 1,000 hubs by 2025. So if we talk about eHUBs, we talk about bricks and bytes. And first of all, if we take a closer look to the bytes, we believe as organization that there's a strong need for a central database and software platform to create like a really strong uniform information network. And for that, one of the things we developed is a digital eHUB pillar, MobiHub pillar, which is running on the TOMP API, which is a Dutch open API. And this for us really links the digital and the physical aspects to make it more visible in the street, but also to make the link with the digital world. If you want to know more about this, our colleague Charles Groen from Taxistop will give a presentation on this on the TOMP API as well this afternoon. So much more information on that. I'm more specialized in the bricks, so I would like to talk a bit more on this. If we talk about the bricks, the physical cluster of mobility modes in the streets, we believe that there's a need for uniformity in signalization to create a uniform network, at least for Flanders, which is a region with, let's say, 6.5 million inhabitants and 300 municipalities and cities. So there should be some uniformity in the design of the hubs. However, we do not believe that every hub should be exactly the same. You always have to take into account the local context. So if we go to this physical realization of an eHUB, we think that there are around 4 steps, and the first step is, of course, is about preparation. In Flanders, as I said before, there is a strategic document since 2019 on mobility hub planning, and one of the first things we do, or the transport regions in Flanders are doing, is to see what type of eHUB, mobility hub, it is. Is it a regional hub, a local hub, a neighborhood hub? And based on that, certain functions are required at that hub, mobility functions, but also additional services. This is a document for Flanders, but as Olga said in the beginning, such documents are also available for Scotland, for the UK. So I think this is quite interesting information if you talk about the top-down approach from mobility hub planning. One thing on these documents is that it gives an indication of where your hub should be located. But in the end, if you really want to plan your hub in detail, you should zoom in more on the location, as Rebecca showed, and as you can see on the map on the left. This is an example of the railway station in Lede in East Flanders, and together with several partners, we sat around the table with the municipality to look for the exact location of the eHUB. And the exact location does not necessarily mean that it will be the location in the end. In this case, the perfect location was on the territory of the National Railway Company. So that means that you have to negotiate with them. They have to agree with the plans. Another thing, especially because we are talking about electric mobility hubs, is that in this case, the energy network wasn't located in the right location. So we need to do a lot of digging in order to bring the energy and the charging infrastructure to the location we wanted to have. So that are things that you should take into account if we talk about mobility hub planning. There are several more things, as Rebecca explained, but also energy network, especially for eHUBs, is very important. Next, apart from the top-down approach, we believe that a bottom-up approach is also very essential for mobility hub planning. We try to talk with local governments, to sit around the table to discuss things. And something we are doing since the COVID crisis is to target more on digital participation in several projects we are in Flanders, because we believe that it's, especially for the neighborhood hubs, it's absolutely necessary to gain as much information as possible from inhabitants in order to create an eHUB that is designed to what the people really want. So if we have this information from top down and from bottom up, we try to bring this together in a visualization. This can be a 2D visualization or a 3D visualization, as you can see. It's just interesting for the neighborhood, for politicians, to convince and to show people how it will look like in the future. The next step is the realization. And there I can say that we do not support municipalities in the technical aspects, like the digging, let's say, but we support them in some tendering procedures on car sharing, charging infrastructure, bike infrastructure, etc. And it depends on the first step, what kind of services you want at the eHUB. In Flanders, we are mainly working with tendering procedures because most of the hubs will come in, let's say, rural areas, which are not necessarily very commercially interesting in the first phase for operators. In some cases, there's also a possibility to work with a concession, where you say, okay, a car sharing system can operate here for 4 years. It's the same for parcel lockers, etc. So that's also a possibility. What we do not have in Belgium or Flanders at this moment is like a concession to operate all services at the hub, to give this to one party. That's not the case. So it's like a puzzle today, and to bring all puzzle pieces together around the eHUB. The third step is about communication, and I showed the picture from the city of Bremen here. I think they have excellent experiences in communication on a more general level with their Udo movie. We also developed, or we launched yesterday, the website safewithcarsharing.be, and it's actually a cost calculator where people can see the difference between or calculate the costs of their own car and compare it with the pricing models from all different car share operators in Belgium based on their specific mobility profile. And these sort of things, we believe, is a good communication strategy to convince people to use mobility hubs or eHUBs. What we believe is also necessary is to go more specific communication via Q&A sessions, test moments, etc., in order to convince people to test different services at an eHUB. Something that is also working quite well at this stage in Flanders is influencers and ambassadors. These are people that are well known in a municipality, and they get, let's say, a certain amount of money to use services at an eHUB for a couple of months or weeks, and in reward they just promote it on social media in their own environment. And for example, in a pilot project in Southeast Flanders together with Solva, we saw that influencers and ambassadors played a quite big role in the uptake of the system in September and October of this year. However, of course, in November, since the end of October, we are in a second lockdown, so we have to see after or in the beginning of 2021 if this continues. And the fourth step is about evaluation, because we believe mobility hub planning it's not a one-time process. It's something that continues, and it's very important to monitor, to get data from providers that are operating at the hub in order to optimize the services at the hub. So that's very important. And something that is also has to be done in the future is some more research on the impact of eHUBs. We know more or less the impact of several services that are operating at an eHUB: car sharing, electric car sharing, bike sharing, etc. But we do not necessarily know the impact of all these services combined together. Although I don't know it's by heart at this stage. So that's some research that has to be done in the future. So that's it. I would like to invite you for some interesting events in the near future. First of all, if you want to know more about eHUB planning, we will host a webinar with the eHUB project on the 15th of December at 10 o'clock. So the link is below, or you can find it also on the eHUBS website. So you're more than welcome there. Secondly, next year, hopefully in June, but depending on the COVID rules, of course, we will have an eHUB International Academy in Bergen and Norway. Rebecca will be there as well, I hope. Which is a 2 or 3 day event where we really go in depth about mobility hub or eHUB planning, and to bring several experts together with site visits as well. And thirdly and lastly, on the 3rd of March next year, we will host the 3rd edition of Shared Mobility Rocks. And this year it will be also a digital event, but we want to do it a rock around the clock edition, which means that we will have studios in Australia, in Japan, in America, in Africa, etc., to conquer the world of shared mobility in a digital way. So thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, please ask them or contact me via mail or LinkedIn.
Thank you, Bram. That's a great overview. As the questions start trickling in, again, moderator privilege, I'll ask my question first. So the MobiHub concept, you showed sort of the history of when it was launched in Flanders in 2017, and it's just received massive success from going, from a launch only 3 years ago to receiving massive federal funding. What do you think was a critical success factor for this MobiHub explosion?
Yeah, I think there are two things. Firstly, the way we launched it, and as you can see, many of the drawings made by autodeel.net and TaxiStop. You can see them are all over the internet, and many people that are busy with mobility hub planning use this drawing. So I think we branded it in a certain way that attracts people, and because there are already quite a lot of eHUBs and mobility hubs in Flanders, it's not really visible. So we created this branding, and to make it hip and cool. So that's something I feel many municipalities are really, they have something new, and it's also very visible, which is for a politician quite important. Mm-hmm. So that's first. And secondly, I think, with in Flanders, there's they designed 15 transport regions, and also the public transport decree is reinvented. So also on a policy level, we were actually on the right spot and on the right moment to launch this concept. That's, I think, two reasons why the uptake is that big today in Flanders. Mm-hmm. But it's not only in Flanders, also in Wallonia and Brussels. The concept it's just because I think it's something new, it's hip, it's make it more visible for people and politicians. So
yeah, and I think your tireless work at autodeel.net and TaxiStop with really promoting a good concept and finding tangible ways to do that. And now more specifically, question, I mean, several multi-hubs and eHUBs have already been implemented. What would you say is a critical success factor for individual multi-hubs, not just the concept, but individual hubs?
Well, I think the hubs that are there today are mainly in rural areas, although the city of Leuven and Zaltleeuw, they implemented eHUBs in September. But if we talk, most of the hubs will be in let's say smaller cities and rural areas, and there the uptake, it's very important that we try to convince local municipalities, local governments to make use of the hubs themselves, because we know that this is a crucial factor. It makes it's sort of they can play a very big role in the first uptake, because they make use of it. They see bikes riding around, see cars riding around. Also, if you can target some private companies in the first stage, I think this is also very important to increase the usage, because if you only depend on private users, let's say, especially in rural areas, we know it will take several years before it becomes profitable, and in the end it can also be that it's not profitable. So it's a combination between private users, businesses, and local governments, and if these three users use the hub, then we know that it can be a success, or it will be a success.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. I think that goes a long way to answering Ferry Smith's question of how the financing is organized of the hubs with so many different commercial partners and public authorities. Is there anything else you would like to add to what you just said with that respect?
So right now there will be a financing, the 105 million euros in the coming years, but actually that's more for the, let's say, the stones. If you want bike sharing, car sharing, etc., there are other funding programs for that. So the based on the it's that money is actually coming from the transport regions. Sometimes, especially in cities, you do not necessarily have to fund for mobility or shared mobility. Operators are more than interested enough. It's just like more giving a concession. But today it's like you have to be a bit creative in Flanders, because there are a lot of funding programs, and you should take something from that, and some cherry picking from everywhere, and in the end you will have enough to create a good, successful mobility hub. But of course, it's not the idea to keep funding these mobility hubs. I mean, just for the first years, and in the end, it should be profitable. There shouldn't be going public money to it until eternity. I mean, it should be profitable in the end in the coming years.
Yeah, I can only say with experience in Bremen that we started with scraping together funding from many sources, anywhere we could get it, but that we don't plan anything without knowing that it will be self-sustaining after first few years.
Yeah, but I mean, in the first years, you just need some public money, especially in rural areas.
Yeah.
You just need it because otherwise nothing happens.
Mm. Exactly, especially if you're planning on making infrastructural changes and having special services. There is a question from a sign. So the city of Nijmegen has 3 eHUBs, which were also featured on Monday during the Meet the Dutch session. So he says for each type of service, you need a different app. And Stein thinks that it's important to create hubs where it's as user-friendly as possible. How do you think this can be achieved, Bram? Is one app for a hub required or not? And what role can the government play?
Well, I think it's definitely interesting. Although, I mean, this means you